I'm James Mattis. I am the writer following Ted on the screen here, or the speaker following Ted. And see if this works. There we go. Yay! All right. So a little about me. I was 3-time California state champion. I was the U.S. amateur national champion in 2008 in cycling. And along with Ted, we got to do this really fantastic race, SFGP, in San Francisco. And the first time it was run was on September 9th, 2001. And I think about this race a lot. And this is a photo from, I think, 2003, actually. But we did that race, and there was about 500,000 fans there, which is just crazy. The environment was so amazing all day doing this race, and just seeing everyone so happy. And then 2 days later, it was 9/11. And so all these thoughts have been going through my mind because it was such a high, then to see such a low by like the cowardice of the terrorists a couple days later. I'm also an amateur world champion, and I won that world championship race on September 11th, 2011. And I knew going into that race what day it was and where I'd be racing, and just how cool it'd be to actually win that race on the 10th anniversary. A couple of additional notes. I'm a degreed engineer in mechanical engineering. Went to UC Berkeley, also did some additional work at MIT. And I'm a co-founder of a small app company that has a variety of apps, including the Bike Plus app for cycling. Okay. Now, basically, I'm going to kind of sort of take this talk is going to kind of connect what Ted's talking about and what Amy's going to be talking about next. And the real main thought here to convey is that words shape your thoughts. And the word choice you use shapes how you think about a subject. When you're having that internal conversation with yourself that Ted was talking about earlier, what words you choose to use in that conversation are going to shape how you think about yourself in the environment around you. So I wanted to think about two critical words we always use in training for cycling or running, and that's train and recover. And train and recover are kind of a two-step process. First, you go and train, and then you recover from the training, and that makes you better. Now, I'm going to try to convince you that those two words are not the right words to think about. And Ted kind of walked out of the room, but to sort of answer a question Ted had earlier about how I was able to stay consistent, it wasn't that I really believed I could do something. It's more about like trying to avoid the negatives. So my goal today is not to convince you of this for sure, but hopefully just add that word maybe, which I think is kind of the key thing in getting your head around problems. It's just not to think, you want to not believe you can't do something, or at least get yourself to the spot of thinking, maybe I can do something. So maybe I'll convince you these are the wrong words. Okay. I first want you guys to take a moment and think about how you feel at the end of a long ride. Kind of close your eyes, imagine like the longest ride you've done recently. How did you feel at the end of that? Did you feel good? Did you feel as fresh as a daisy? Did you feel like you could do it again? Did you feel like you could set a personal best right now if you tried to do like a best 5-minute effort? Or did you feel hot, sweaty, and tired? Now, when I think about this, I think about, for example, this day. This is a photo of the finish line at the 2008 National Championships. I'm about to win. I'm pointing, I think, my ex-wife and just kind of giving a barbaric yell as I've won. And you're like, yeah, something like that. This race was very challenging. It was 120 miles long. The temperatures all day ranged between 100 and 105. We decided for some crazy reason to go on this breakaway about 50 miles left. And there was just 3 of us in this breakaway, and we were only about 90 seconds in front of the field the rest of the day, so it was full gas for 50 miles. Let's zoom in on this for a second here. And I want to ask you guys a question. If you notice something odd about this photo,
You don't tired at all.
that's not exactly it. I'm standing up. Why am I standing up? It's because I'm cramping so hard, I can't sit down. So there's a key kind of thought here I want you to leave with today, and that training doesn't actually make you strong. training makes you weak. When you're riding a bike, it's not making you stronger, it's making you more tired. Or in my case, so tired and so cramped up that you can't even pedal a bike any longer. And what I want to think about from that line is imagine if I had never uncramped. I had done this big ride, my legs are cramped, I can barely walk. What happens if I had never, I'm still cramped. Today I was like walking around like this because that's the best I could do 7 years later. There's something else that actually is helping me. So let's go for a second to the dictionary. This is what Merriam-Webster has to say about the verb to untrain. Number one on the definitions is to teach us so as to make qualified, fit, or proficient. And I think that's kind of like when you're training a dog, sit, down, over. That's kind of what we're thinking here. Definition number two is to form by instruction, discipline, or drill. And definition three, which is probably how most people think of training, is to make prepared as by exercise for a test of skill. Okay, where does that lead? That kind of leads to sports like baseball. Here's Buster Posey of San Francisco Giants taking batting practice. He'll get a bucket of balls and someone to throw the balls to a ball machine. And he's going to sit there and work on his swing repeatedly. That repeated training of the muscle systems to hit the ball. And he's going to be thinking about his footwork, where the bat head is, how his arms are moving, what he's looking at, where he puts his head, how he visualizes the ball coming out of the pitcher's hand towards the bat. All that trying to program the muscles so that they do the right thing. And the way he gets better is by just doing this a lot. The more times he does the practice, the better he gets. But riding is not really training. When you ride, you're getting tired. It's not making you better. The actual riding itself isn't what's helping you. In fact, if you're to do 10,000 hours of riding, you're not going to be fit. 10,000 hours of recovery after you ride, though, that might actually make you fit. So let's look at the verb recover. So the verb recover means to regain a normal position or condition. At least that's what Mr. Merriam and Mr. Webster say about it. But recovery makes you strong. It's not about regaining position. It's about something else. And I want you to think about that whole concept of regaining a normal condition. When you do this whole process, this two-step process of riding and then resting, are you trying to just regain a normal position, or are you trying to actually get better than you were? Because if just getting back to where you started was what the goal was, well, you could just sit on the couch and have ice cream because that's going to keep you at the same spot, right? Why do all that effort? So our collective goal is not just to regain our normal position, but actually get better at something to improve. So these are the wrong words, at least according to Merriam-Webster. I'm sorry, I have to apologize for that. We've all been using kind of the wrong words for a long time. I'm going to try to suggest a couple of new ideas and new words to look at. So again, to review, training makes you weak. Recovery not just makes you strong, but stronger, with the emphasis on the better than you were element of it. So for some new words, let's try, for example, the word prime. Prime is a verb, and it's defined as to take steps to encourage the growth or functioning of something. You might think, for example, using a primer or priming a wall before you're going to paint it. You're preparing the wall to have the paint applied and have the paint work properly. Prime is also used when you're talking about explosives. A primer is something that will trigger the explosive reaction. It's preparing the explosives to have that reaction that's going to release energy. And instead of recover, how about the verb adapt? Adapt is defined as to make fit as per use, often by modification. That's kind of what you're trying to do with recovery. You want to become more fit, and you want the muscles in your body and your heart and your lungs to be modified to actually do a better job. So priming prepares your body to become stronger. That's the riding aspect of it. That's going to prepare yourself for what's going to happen afterwards. But it's the actual adapting step that makes you stronger. So let's think about some applications of this and how, if you're thinking about the world in terms of priming and adapting, how that can help you approach certain problems that we're all kind of common to riding. The first application I want to consider is how do you avoid overtraining? And I'm going to use training again here just because it's so commonly used, but at least changing our words that we use can change how you think about what to do here. So overtraining is defined as training to excess or beyond advantage. It's the dictionary definition. That's pretty much what I think everyone kind of thinks about it as. So what happens when people think about this, when they think about training is, oh, training is what's making you fit. You go, I'm not fit. Training makes you fit. I need more training. And so you start up here, but training doesn't make you fit. Training makes you weak. So you start training because you think training makes me fit. You end up down here. And then you don't allow yourself enough time to adapt because you're thinking training's making me fit. It's not anything else. You don't allow yourself enough time for adaptation. You don't get quite back to where you started. And then you're not feeling as good because you've overtrained a little bit. And you go, oh, training makes me fit. I need more training. So you come even farther down. And you can keep on following this little spiral down where you keep on doing too much, not allowing your body sufficient rest time to adapt to the training and allow yourself to get better. So if you change your framework, the way you're viewing the world, and start thinking about adapting instead of recovery and adapting instead of training, the whole word choice, the word change helps you change how you approach this. So starting with adapting makes you stronger. Why would you ever want to under adapt, right? You want to allow yourself enough time to adapt because that's actually what's going to be helping you get stronger. And this is that little change of thought can help you exit that overtraining spiral. Adapting makes me strong. I don't want to under adapt. But you know you need a little bit of riding to kind of prime the body for that adaptation. You do a ride, it primes the adaptation, and then you go, okay, make sure I don't under adapt. You give yourself sufficient time to adapt, and you're actually better than you started. You're stronger than you started. You do another ride that primes the adaptation, and then you have that same thought again. I don't want to under adapt, so I need to do everything possible to recover properly. And again, you can be above where you started. That little change of thought where you're focusing more on the adaptation side, the rest side of your training, of your physical preparation program will help you get better. Now, if you want to think about what's the best tool for adapting, you shouldn't be necessarily thinking, oh, I should get a new bike. You might want to consider a lazy one. This is actually the time when you're getting better. When you're on the bike, you're not getting better, you're getting worse. And so having a device like a lazy boy that's a nice leather lazy boy will help you, is actually the thing that's going to be best suited to help you get better. This dog is really showing you the right way to get better. To sit there, lounge around, stare out the window, and that's actually what's going to be making you fit. A little kind of aside here, when I thought about the slide, I kind of went to the Lazy Boy website, took a look around. This is actually the James model line of Lazy Boys. Yeah, curious little side fact here. So, of course, you still have to do the ride first. You can't just go straight to the Lazy Boy. You have to go ride first to set up the body and prepare the body for that adaptation. But then the adaptation side of it has to be critical. Okay, let's consider another application of these two words. And that's in how you optimize your endurance rides. Let's look at two different endurance rides here and try to deduce which might actually be better for you. So ride number one is a 4-hour ride at 250 watts. And hopefully everyone there is familiar enough with power numbers and wattage to have some idea of what I'm talking about. And let's also compare this to a 5-hour ride at 200 watts. Now, a little aside here, 4 hours at 250 watts is the same number of total kilojoules as 5 hours at 200 watts. So these are identical in terms of the energy expenditure. I have to kind of introduce a concept that's been going around in the scientific literature called fat mass. Now, endurance rides, one of the main things we're trying to do is train the mitochondria inside every muscle cell to get better at their function. And as you start to exercise, at low power, the main source of energy is fatty acids or fats. And this will increase up to a point called fat max, which is kind of roughly correlated with like the top level of your endurance training zones. And after that, you'll start to use carbohydrates, and the amount of fats will be less in usage. And so as you get closer and closer to threshold, basically your energy shifts from using fatty acids to carbohydrates. Now there's something really neat about that fat max point. And what it's neat about it is that fatty acids are only burned in the mitochondria. Carbohydrates can be burned both in the mitochondria and in the rest of the cell, but you're not sure where it's going to be. It could be in the rest of the cell, it could be in the mitochondria, you don't know. But fatty acids, if you're at fat max, you know that's got to be the point where the mitochondria are going full out. So that fat max point is basically the point of maximum priming for the mitochondria, the maximum amount of stimulus the mitochondria can have. Now, for me, 250 watts is roughly equivalent to where my fat max is. So if I rode at 200 watts, I'm actually not stimulating as much as going at 250. Now, also note, if you were to say go at 275, 275 is going to be somewhere over here. That's also not good because I'm actually not stimulating as much. I'm going harder, but I'm not maximizing that stimulus for fat max. So that's my goal is for that run. And a little note here, obviously, you're trying to maximize the amount of total time between the next day and your next ride, how much adaptation you're going to have. A 4-hour ride gives you 1 extra hour that day to adapt. And 1 extra hour of adaptation time is basically 4% more time adapting per day. 15 minutes is about 1% more adaptation time per day. So yesterday, there were a few presentations. I think Billy Ennis's presentation talked about going to the wind tunnel and try to find 1% gains. 15 minutes less riding time or more rest time per day is about 1% gain per day. And over a long period of time, that little reduction in timing time, that little increase in rest and adaptation time can have a really significant impact on your performance. Okay, a key point to remember in all this is that adaptation is an aerobic process. And so how quickly you adapt and recover from an activity will depend on how strong you are aerobically. And as you improve your aerobic fitness by riding, as your VO2 max goes up, you actually will adapt faster. So I've kind of given some stuff here, but some kind of like a general idea. But remember, everyone is actually going to be a unique snowflake. So what works for you won't work exactly the same for everyone else because my aerobic capacity and your aerobic capacity are not the same. Further, as your aerobic capacity changes, your own adaptation time and adaptation performance is going to change. So what works best for you will also constantly be changing. It's really confusing. The same thing you did last year to train will not probably work the same this year. You'll have to constantly tweak that. And the fitter you are, the faster you adapt, and the greater level of priming required to foster adaptation. All right, so I hope I've kind of convinced you that maybe it's time to change some new words, prime and adapt, and train and recover. I know this is kind of a very conceptual speech, conceptual presentation, but I think this one little simple change can help you avoid a lot of the common problems people have with their training and recover, the whole process of getting to be fitter. All right, let's open up the questions if anyone has them.
I think it's great, actually. I train a lot of people, and if you train for 6 months, and they're like, it sucks, it's hard, and then they go on vacation for 2 weeks, and they come back, and all their PRs are done.
Yeah,
these are the exact words why that works.
Yeah, and I think that's if you kind of just have that change, like it's not the riding, it's not the training that's making you fit, it's that recovery that's actually where the process happens, right? But I think a lot of us think that sitting on the couch is bad. I should be doing something, right? But it's not true. Sitting on the couch actually is where the magic's happening, right? but it's like, it's a real struggle mentally for us to kind of accept that, right? But I'm not doing anything. How is that actually helping? Well, it is.
So if, like, your benefit, that makes sense. How do you actually put that in practice? So say you do a long ride, but you don't have the luxury of sitting and recovering because you have like work or kids or multiple things to do. Like, how do you optimize that or what would you suggest?
I think part of this is really thinking maybe you should take half-hour shorter rides. You know, is that extra half hour actually helping you? Or would you be better off going a little bit harder, but for a little bit less time? Right. And I think a lot of people kind of get in this habit of like, I'm going to go ride for 5 hours, but they kind of pedal for 5 hours easily and don't do actually much work. And it's really common. I think my longest endurance rides after the last couple of years were about 4.5 hours. I never really got longer than that, except the training camps where I was forced to do it. And I always knew that I was not going to be as good coming out of training camp as I was riding on my own. But I was doing like 4-hour rides at like, 275, 285 watts, right? So like I was out there on the gas and then I go home and kind of watch baseball because it's really relaxing. I can fall asleep really while watching baseball, right? So, but yeah, like that's my recommendation is just maybe increase the effort level a bit. Thinking about that fat max graph, if you go too hard, you're also going to be going on the bottom side of that.
How do you determine that? Like, how is it with power meter? Is it?
Yeah, so I was
Or
using a power meter to do it. There's not a good way without going to a lab, but it roughly corresponds to when people talk about like zone 2 and your endurance zone, it's going to pretty much be at the top of that zone. So for me, back when I was training more, like heart rate 140, 275 watts or so was about my fat max. It's going to be whatever for yourself, the same thing. But I would kind of err maybe a little bit shorter than that. You don't want to go too much over is the key point, right? But yeah, so what you want to do is like if you're riding around too much and you're coasting, not pedaling, your heart rate's down, that's just wasted time, right? Yeah. So and then an extra 15 minutes to half hour a day, all of a sudden that's 2% extra recovery time.
Kind of long periodization, right? We're building up for a period of time.
Yeah.
If you're going to increase, you got to drop down.
Even in preparation though, like during that, it's just taking a little bit less time out there each day can actually help you get further. And I think having both trained for cycling and also for running, I did a couple marathons. The peaking in cycling is very different from the peaking in marathons. And each sport has different things that are required to kind of really how you taper into the event are different. So in cycling, the taper is a lot shorter than in running. And it's actually a lot easier to kind of taper for cycling. The mental game tapering for running is really hard.
I was going to ask this yesterday. What do you think about like all the kids that are doing Everesting and half Everesting and 15 hours?
It's definitely a lot of. I mean, I think it'd be a lot of fun for people, but in
Yeah.
terms of actually getting you fit, it's probably not doing a lot. It's too much. You do have to be. Your training head does have to be kind of targeted at the event you're doing. And so if you're doing gravel races where it's kind of a long, slow grind, and if that was your target, then your training actually can be longer because the races are longer. For bike racing that I was doing, it's so explosive. If you're not training that explosive stuff, you're not going to get very far. And so I know there's a lot of people who prescribe these long 20-minute intervals, and that's typically not useful unless you're doing grand tours. Like most of the stuff you do is about 1 minute, 5 minute. And so but it's a different event, right? You have to kind of target what you're doing to the specific needs of the event you're preparing for. In marathon running, it's kind of 2 to 3 hours at that pace, right? And so you don't have to do 1 minute sprints. 20-minute stuff is useless. It's 2 hours steady, right? The other question.
different.
Yeah, track is a
But
whole,
the adaptation is pretty, yeah.
yeah. You know, it's the same thing, right? It's like, even when thinking about like how many intervals to do, is it better to do like 10 intervals that are okay? You want one great interval in there, 10 great intervals? Like there's actually no data on this whatsoever. And I kind of feel that like when I was doing intervals, I think having the one great interval is most important for you physically. But I know in terms of my mental game, feeling like I actually did all the intervals sort of helped me feel like I wasn't slacking. But I had to tell myself that doing, say, intervals number 7 through 10, kind of not so great, was okay, right? But there's a lot of little mental games you have to play with yourself, even though that it's interval number 2 where you have the numbers, which are actually causing the important changes. That's the important interval. But the other intervals actually still have value, even if they're not as good, right? And that also is with track cycling when you're doing sprints too, right? Is it better to have like 10 good sprints, or is it that one sprint during the session that matters for actually making performance improvements? It's probably just that one great sprint that matters. There are questions? Yeah. I do, and I think that's kind of what when I was sort of saying everyone's unique snowflake, there is going to be a spot that really does kind of personally work with you, and you almost. I'm a big believer in kind of when they talk about scientific training, I think people talk about like going to a book and opening it up and reading, like, here's what these other researchers found. I should use this research training plan. And when I think of scientific training, I really think about using yourself as an experiment, trying out different stuff and going, for me, the 1 minute and 30-second intervals are what work for my body. And the 5 minute aren't as good. But for someone else, the 5 minute might be the ones that work really well. I didn't bring this slide in, and maybe I should have, but there's a paper that was written in around 2001 or 2002, where they actually went and studied which type of intervals work best to train you for a 40K. And they did 30-second intervals, 1 minute, 2 minute, 4 minute, and 8 minute. Now, the weird thing about this is they didn't do anything longer than 8 minutes. And what they found was the two best intervals for people were the 4-minute intervals and the 30-second intervals. But there was one guy who was an outlier, and he did the best on 2-minute intervals, like quite a bit. So the 2-minute intervals made this one guy really good. And so maybe you're a 4-minute interval person, maybe you're a 30-second interval person, but what if you're that one guy who really likes the 2-minute intervals? And it's like, you kind of need to try them all out and then see how your body responds to it. Try to get a sense of like, okay, I've tried them out. Man, those 2-minute intervals, those are the ones for me. Even if all my friends are saying not to do it, some reason for me they work, right? And that's actually real science. It's using your body as the experiment and trying to find out what really is working for you personally. Oh, but answers the question, yeah. Other questions? All right, I think I know it was kind of short, but we can get back on schedule maybe. Yeah.